Welcome to Dark History, where we speak the unspoken.
The unspoken lives of ancient Greek sex workers. When we think of ancient Greece, our minds conjure images of marble statues, toga-clad philosophers debating in the agora, and glorious democratic ideals. But in the shadows of the Acropolis, in the bustling ports and grimy back alleys, a different, far more complex society thrived. This is not the sanitized history of grand thinkers. This is the story of a culture built on hypocrisy and a hidden economy fueled by the very people society pretended not to see. Historical background: the ancient Greeks held a paradoxical view of sex and desire. While their philosophy glorified the male body and celebrated same-sex relationships among men, the role of women in society was rigidly defined. A respectable woman, a citizen's wife, was expected to remain a secluded figure, confined to the home, her purpose solely to bear legitimate heirs. This created a profound social and emotional vacuum. This rigid system was rooted in the concept of the oikos, the household, which was considered the fundamental unit of the state. The wife's role was to manage the oikos and produce legitimate heirs to ensure the continuation of the family line and citizenship. Her virtue was paramount, and her sexuality was strictly controlled. For a man, however, sexual fulfillment was seen as a separate, practical matter, one that couldn't be satisfied within the confines of his own household. This led to a split in society, creating a demand that was met by two distinct classes of sex workers, the pornoi and the hetairai. The pornoi occupied the lowest rung of society. Their name, from which our word pornography is derived, literally meant those who sell. They were slaves, freedwomen, or impoverished foreigners, working in state-run brothels, often located in the seedy port districts. They were public property, their bodies taxed by the state, their lives a brutal cycle of labor and exploitation. On the other hand, the hetairai, or companions, were a different breed entirely. They were highly educated, often foreign women, who had a level of independence and intellectual freedom that was unheard of for citizen wives. They were skilled in music, philosophy, and art, attending all-male symposia and engaging in intellectual debates. They were the stars of a parallel society, desired by the most powerful men of Athens, yet forever relegated to the role of an outsider. They were not citizens, and their children had no rights to inheritance. The core story: for the pornoi, the reality was unyielding. Many were slaves from a young age, with no hope of ever earning their freedom. Their lives were controlled by pimps or the state, their identities erased. Their faces were marked, their clothing distinctive, so all of society would know their profession. They were a living currency, and their bodies were a public utility, a grim irony in the very birthplace of democracy. The dry, bureaucratic fact of their existence is perhaps the most chilling part of their story. The government taxed them, using the revenue to fund things like the very ships that secured Athens' empire. It was an empire built, in part, on the backs of its most marginalized women. The hetairai had a different kind of cage. They were given a taste of freedom and intellectual respect, a privilege denied to citizen women. They could own property, appear in public, and converse with the likes of Plato and Socrates. But this respect came with a bitter price. They were perpetually defined by their role as companions and entertainers. Their intellectual prowess was a tool to attract and keep powerful men, not to advance their own standing. Their status was a carefully curated illusion of power. They were never truly accepted into society's inner circle, and their lives were always a precarious balancing act, one wrong move away from ruin. In this world of subtle and overt cruelty, stories of cunning and wit were their only weapons. There's the story of Phryne, one of the most famous hetairai. Accused of impiety, she faced a jury that was about to condemn her. In a last-ditch effort, her lawyer stripped her bare, revealing her magnificent body, and arguing that such beauty could not possibly harbor a sinful soul.
Like and subscribe.
The jury, in awe, acquitted her. It's a tale that sounds like a victory for female empowerment. But in truth, it's a cold, hard example of how a woman's value was ultimately tied to her physical form, even in the most intellectual of settings. But Phryne's story is an exception, not the rule. The reality for most hetairai was a life of constant insecurity. They were an investment for their former owners, who would train them in music, poetry, and philosophy. But their freedom came with the understanding that they had to maintain a certain reputation and a network of powerful clients to survive. Their lives were a performance, and their independence was always contingent on the whims of the men who paid for their company. Social and political impact. Ancient Greek society operated under a profound hypocrisy. While they exalted philosophy and public virtue, they institutionalized and profited from a system of female subjugation. They built glorious temples with the taxes of the pornoi, and they discussed their highest ideals in the company of the hetairai. This system allowed men to separate sexual desire from their domestic lives, preserving the purity of their wives, while simultaneously benefiting from and exploiting other women. The male-dominated society, in its quest for social order and control, created a parallel, unseen world where women were either secluded as wives or treated as commodities. The lives of the pornoi were a living testament to this hypocrisy. They were the anonymous, disposable workforce that made Athenian life comfortable for its male citizens. Their existence was an accepted, necessary evil, a footnote in the history of a civilization that saw itself as the pinnacle of virtue. They were not just a social class, they were a tool of state control, a silent, bleeding part of the Athenian machine. This grim arrangement was so ingrained in the culture that even the most respected philosophers took it for granted. They would write about justice and truth while sitting in a room with a woman who had no legal rights, no power, and whose only purpose was to provide pleasure. Even the most celebrated figures of the time participated in this system. Pericles, one of the most powerful men in Athens, took a hetairai named Aspasia of Miletus as his companion. Aspasia was famous for her wit, her intelligence, and her ability to hold her own in debates with the greatest thinkers of the day. Yet, for all her influence, she was never truly accepted. She was often slandered and mocked by playwrights for her influence over a powerful man. A clear sign that a woman could have influence but never true power. Aspasia's story shows the biting irony of their society. They valued a woman's mind but could never grant her the citizenship that would have made her an equal. Legacy and fall. The unspoken lives of ancient Greek sex workers are a crucial part of history. A stark reminder that even the most celebrated civilizations have a dark underbelly. Their story is a powerful warning about the consequences of societal hypocrisy and the dehumanization that comes with power and prejudice. Their fate teaches us that history is not just about the celebrated figures who built monuments, but about the countless, anonymous individuals who were forced to support that grandeur from the shadows. The names of the great philosophers are etched in stone, but the names of the women who lived in the back alleys are lost to time, their stories silenced. The Greek system of sexual double standards and female segregation was not unique, but its formal, codified nature sets it apart. The legacy of this system, where a woman's worth was determined by her role as a wife or a commodity, seeped into later Western thought and culture. It perpetuated the idea that female sexuality was something to be either controlled and contained for the sake of the family or exploited for the benefit of men. The stories of the pornoi and the hetairai are a chilling reflection of a society that was so concerned with its own perceived purity that it chose to build its grandeur on a foundation of hypocrisy and hidden suffering. That's the end of today's descent into darkness. We've just scratched the surface of history's greatest horrors. If you found this journey into the past's shadows interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe. Next time, we're diving into the most terrifying medieval torture devices that will haunt your nightmares. If you're ready to learn more unspoken truths, don't forget to ring that bell. You wouldn't want to be late to the next execution, would you?
It's a dark history.